If you've ever been to a lake, a stream, a river, and you've seen a fish jump out of the water to eat something, that fish is most likely feeding on a bug or a type of fly. And that's exactly what dry fly fishing is. Dry fly fishing is trying to closely mimic that fly on top of the water or insect on top of the water in order to catch that fish. But you have to mimic it as closely as possible. A dry fly floats on top of the water, and as you can see by its name, it does not get wet. There is a wet fly type of fishing, but that's most typically called a nymph fishing. But today we're going to focus on dry flies specifically, why you should fish them, when you can fish them, and then go over some certain types of these flies to get a better understanding and knowledge of these flies as well. So now that we know what dry fly fishing is, why should you do it? For me personally, dry fly fishing is the funnest type of fishing I've ever done. With dry fly fishing, it almost feels like it's more of a type of hunting. You're able to sit there and watch those fish rise, jump out of the water and eat a bug. Then your job is to watch closely and to see if you can mimic that fish, that fly, and to see if you can catch that fish. If it doesn't work the first time, you try a different drift, is what we speak of in fly fishing, which means throwing another cast out there, trying to make it look even more natural, or you tie another fly to try and catch that fish as well. You're mimicking exactly what they're eating and you're trying to pinpoint that, and it can be difficult, but after today's video you'll have a little more understanding of what this is and the type of flies that you can use in order to do this. Now let's talk about when you can dry fly fish. So dry fly fishing, what this is you're actually mimicking the adult version of a bug. A bug starts in the water in its earliest life form, and what we call a nymph, and then it begins to emerge to the top of the water, what we call emergers. Once it fully emerges, it becomes an adult, or what we call a dry fly, and that's what we're discussing today. So when do these hatches happen? And that's what we call them as hatches. These hatches of bugs is when thousands of these bugs are turning into an adult form. You might see them flying around the water, flying around the river, and when they're doing this, some are getting blown back onto the water, or they're still hatching on top of the water, and this is when the trout are feeding on them. So what affects this hatch? Or when do these bugs end up on the water? Well, what typically is conducive to this is the water temperature and the temperature outside. If it's too cold, you're most likely not going to have any dry flies on top of the water. So as you can guess, spring through late fall is typically the best dry fly fishing conditions, and really the only dry fly fishing conditions. And now if you have water that is above 50 degrees, most likely you're going to have a hatch and you're going to be able to dry fly fish. Now other things that affect this hatch, other than just the water temperature, could be the humidity in the air. It could be if there's rain, if there's any clouds in the sky, or if there's a lot of sunlight. Certain bugs like to hatch when there's sunlight, and other bugs don't like to hatch unless it's cloudy. So all of these things can affect a hatch. But typically, if you're going out on a stream, a river, or a lake in the spring through late fall, and the weather's nice, you're going to be able to throw some dry flies at those fish to see if you can catch them. So what can you catch while dry fly fishing? Well, typically it is a method used for trout, but you can also use this for salmon as well as other panfish. Anywhere where you see a fish eating insects or flies or bugs, you can dry fly fish. So what do these flies actually imitate? What bugs are you trying to mimic? Well, many common bugs that you're trying to mimic are, first of all, mayflies, which are a big bug group in dry fly fishing, then caddisflies, then you're looking at your damsels, or also known as dragonflies, and then your stoneflies, and then finally terrestrials. Terrestrials can be grasshoppers, they can be beetles, ants, crickets. From the name terrestrial, you see that they live on land. These bugs don't actually come up from the water or hatch in the water, but they get on the water by jumping from leaf to leaf, or from weed to weed, or from getting blown onto the water. This can be a very big hatch to fish, a very fun, explosive hatch in terms of the fish coming up to feed. So let's get now into a little bit more depth of some dry flies, their specific names, when you use them, and what they also look like. Let's first look at the mayfly dry flies. Now these dry flies are used anywhere from spring into late fall. This is when they hatch. So a pretty big hatch. One of the most famous ones is a blue-winged olive. Now this fly, as you can see, gets its name from its color as well. This fly can be fished again from spring into late fall. Typically in the spring though and the fall is when it's most used and when you'll catch the most fish using it. The second type of mayfly dry fly is called a pale morning dun. Now this one is very obvious, as you can see the color of this fly. And this fly is actually used more in the midsummer to late summer is when they begin to hatch more and you're able to use more of these flies. The next flies we're going to talk about are going to be caddis flies. The first fly we're going to look at is called the elk hair caddis. And if you talk to many fly fishermen, this is one of their favorite flies and it's also one of my favorite flies. You can almost catch fish with this almost anywhere. As you can see, the back of this fly is actually made with real elk hair. It comes in several different colors, a tan, an olive. The next caddis fly is called a foam caddis. Now this caddis here, you can see there's a little piece of foam on the back of it. This foam actually helps this fly float better. So it's a great dry fly. One of the problems that many people come across while dry fly fishing is keeping their fly on top of the water to keep it float, to not only see it, but to keep it as natural as possible. So this little piece of foam helps that caddis stay on top of the water. The next form of elk hair caddis, or caddis in general, is called a Goddard caddis. Now this is the most natural looking caddis. It really looks like the fly. I really started using these recently in the past couple years, and I really saw a difference in my fishing when I fished caddises. For some reason, it just seemed like the fish enjoyed these more. It could have been the look of them, and they also float pretty well, which I always enjoy. That makes fishing for me a lot easier, but another great caddis fly to use, a dry fly to use while out fishing. So the next fly that we're going to talk about and go more depth in is a stonefly dry fly. Now what really mimics this fly the best is a stimulator. Now a stimulator, as you can tell by the name, really stimulates that fish to come up to the top and want to eat it. And why? Well, as you can tell, this fly is pretty big. It looks pretty juicy to the fish, and stoneflies are the same way. They're big, juicy flies, and these flies actually don't fly out of the water. They typically crawl out of the water, hatch on a leaf or a weed near the river, and then you'll see them flying around. These hatches don't happen as often, but when they do, this is probably one of the best hatches to fish because the bugs are so big, the fish are just as hungry as ever it seems, and just an absolute blast to get out of the water and to fish these when you can. The next bugs we're going to go more in depth on is going to be terrestrials. This is one of my favorite type of bugs to fish. These terrestrials typically hatch in the middle of the summer to late fall when the weather is hot outside. It's grasshoppers, it's ants, it is beetles, it is crickets. Right now we're looking at what we call a Dave's hopper. This is one of my favorite hoppers to fish. It really mimics a hopper well. It has the bright colored legs, it has the boxy head, and I love to fish this because it just, one, it's so easy to see on the water, and honestly that's probably my favorite reason, is it's easy to identify, but also it's just fun to see the fish come up and eat these. And when they're on the water and these bugs, grasshoppers are out, it seems like the fish are just keying in on these, especially in the higher mountain streams and rivers. Fish love them, but they can also be used on lakes as well. Another example of this is a parachute hopper. These come in many different colors. This one is an olive, and you can see it's a pretty sizable fly, dry fly, and the reason for that is because grasshoppers are big. And we'll also look here at what we call Amy's ant. Amy's ant mimics a flying ant. You can see the wings or the white feathers on this fly to mimic those, again, the wings on there. And this one is also made of foam. And again, if you recall, when you add foam to a dry fly, it really helps it to stay buoyant and to float, which makes it even easier for you to dry fly fish as well. So this is just a brief overview of what dry fly fishing is, and again a little more in depth on some of the flies that you may use as you go out fly fishing. If you have any more questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. Please subscribe if you like the information. There's going to be some more information coming out on how-tos in fly fishing, some informational videos, as well as some gear reviews, and me just going out to fly fish. So please subscribe if you like. Leave a comment if you didn't like something. If you did like something, I'd love to hear feedback. I'd love to see what I can improve on, or what I can make videos on in the future. But we'll see you next time in the next video.